What kind of interesting results have you seen from either bioregulator peptides or just other peptides?
We've seen people with crazy autoimmune issues just help to stabilize their immune systems, right?
Wow.
And just be able to live a normal life. There's one woman in our community, she had a spinal leak because of a medical error. And so she was essentially horizontal for 2 years. And she was able to restore her mobility and reclaim her life by using GHK and thymosin beta-4, and I think a couple of other peptides.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I am so excited to be speaking to Nathalie Niddam. I've been listening to Nathalie for quite some time. Nathalie, I scoured your channel and listened to almost all your podcasts. You're a lively host and a lot of very valuable information. And peptides are getting hotter and hotter. A lot of people may still not know enough. So we still have to explain to people, well, peptides are these short amino acid sequences and that's naturally existing in your body. So correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that there are about 300,000 different types of peptides floating around in the body. And we've identified about 7,000.
Yeah, like I would not be surprised at that number at all. The 7,000 identified, definitely I've heard that number tossed around. And, it's one of those things with the human body. We don't know what we don't know. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Before I jump in, I want to introduce Nathalie. So Nathalie is a holistic nutritionist, a human potential coach, and epigenetic coach who is immersed in the world of health optimization and longevity. And a few years ago, she stumbled upon peptides and bioregulator peptides at a health optimization conference and has been immersed in the study and application of these peptides as health optimization and longevity tool ever since. So Nathalie runs a large and growing biohacking community on Facebook. It's called the Optimizing Superhuman Performance Group, and it's the host of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance podcast. And she speaks at health conferences on longevity and bioregulator peptides. So at today, Nathalie's biological age is 14 years younger than her chronological age. And this is wonderful, and including telomere matching. That's someone matching somebody that's 22 years younger. So her goal is to keep that clock moving back and to make sure that people learn this is possible for them as well if they're willing to take charge of their health. So I can't wait to hear you sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. This is going to be an exciting discussion. So I know you've been talking about peptides a lot, and then you said you're very passionate about bioregulators. So I'm sure most people don't know what bioregulators are. So maybe you can enlighten everybody.
For sure. Well, as you opened up, peptides are these short proteins, really. Their peptides are 50 amino acids or short or less, and naturally occurring in the body. But, we've been isolating them now for a while. Bioregulator peptides redefine short. Bioregulator peptides are at most 4 amino acids long and as little as 2 amino acids. So they are the tiniest of tiny peptides, and they're peptide chains that are also naturally occurring in the human body and have a very, very incredible way of what they are epigenetic switches. And what that means is that they are so tiny and they carry that perfect polar charge that allows them to travel across the cellular membrane, travel across the nuclear membrane, so that now they're in the nucleus of the cell. And what we find in the nucleus of the cell, a little bit of biology class, guys, here, sorry, is your DNA. And that DNA is in charge of manufacturing proteins that your body needs to function. And what the bioregulator peptide does is it finds its binding site on that DNA helix and upregulates the production of specific proteins. And what those proteins are is they are proteins to regenerate and restore function to that tissue, gland, or organ. So they're pretty fascinating. It's amazing to even think that there's something out there that can help that, and from nature of all places, that can actually help our bodies to regenerate and restore themselves from within. And so these bioregulator peptides were first isolated by a gentleman or a researcher, medical doctor in Russia. His name is Vladimir Kavinson. And Dr. Kavinson has done over 40 years of research on the bioregulator peptides, isolating them, studying them, and running clinical trials on humans. I'm sure he started with animals and then moved on to humans. So he's got a ton of really interesting data on how these peptides can restore health and can really restore balance to the body. So it's an interesting thing. And it's a little bit different than the typical peptides we talk about, in the sense that the bioregulators always are modulating function. So you can use a thyroid bioregulator, for example, with someone who is either hyper or hypothyroid, and what it's going to try and do is bring that thyroid back into balance. They're quite unique that way.
Yeah, beautiful. So does that mean as long as the amino acid sequences are less than 4, that make them bioregulators?
Not exactly. So you've got peptides like KPV or GHK. And, it could be semantics at this point, because GHK was discovered by Dr. Lauren Pickart in 1973. I've heard rumor that said that Kavinson said, "Oh, if I would have discovered that, it would have been a bioregulator." It's hard to know. And then you get like KPV is another one. It's not particularly a bioregulator. It's just a fragment of melanotan, of that alpha MSH peptide that is antimicrobial. So the bioregulator peptides their quality is that they specifically act on DNA. They don't, it's not like a BPC 157 that's going to bind to a receptor on the cell and initiate a cascade, right? So, which isn't to say that the longer chain peptides don't sometimes impact genetic expression, because they do. And GHK is a perfect example of that. Like GHK, that copper peptide is a peptide that can influence over 1,000 genes, right? It's like you can imagine it flipping genes on and off, up and down the genome, going, you need to be up, you need to be down, kind of thing. It's incredibly, I don't think we still know a lot of what GHK is capable of, but already what we know is pretty impressive. But for the bioregulators, they're much more specific. And so, for example, there's about 26 bioregulators that are commonly known and understood. Although today I was speaking to someone who works with Professor Kavinson. He apparently has a library of 52 bioregulators that he's identified, but we have access to about 26 of them, and they are specific to tissues, glands, and organs. So so what that means is we have a bioregulator that acts on the pineal gland, which is that tiny little pine-shaped gland in your brain that regulates your circadian rhythm. It regulates melatonin production. It also has kind of like a very interesting regulatory effect on the entire endocrine system, which is your hormones. And then also its big superpower is that it can activate telomerase, which would help to restore and preserve the length of your telomeres on the end of your DNA. So it's called epitelon or epitelon. It actually has many other names because there are different forms of bioregulators we can talk about. But epitelon would be the one bioregulator. If you've heard of one, it's that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And then we have other ones. We have one for the adrenal glands, for the thyroid, for the ovaries, for the testes, the prostate, the heart, the blood vessels, the lungs, the pancreas, the liver, the kidneys. What am I forgetting? Oh, the brain, the central nervous system. It's, so you have these specific bioregulators for every one of those organs.
So how powerful are they when they're actually used for somebody with, let's say, brain disease or heart disease? I give them some bioregulator that's specific for that organ. how effective are they at helping these people?
That's a really good question. And I would say that in the literature that I've seen in like out of the studies that have been done in Russia, very often they're going to be used alongside other conventional therapies. So what they talk about is they will improve outcomes. So the thing with the bioregulator, it's not like you're going to pop a bioregulator and all of a sudden you're going to be Wolverine and you're just going to grow new body parts kind of thing. It's a little more complicated than that. I think that and I love that question because ultimately the impact that a bioregulator is going to have on helping the system come back into balance or to heal is going to have a lot to do with everything else that you're doing to help that body to heal and how far out of balance the system is, right? Mm-hmm. So in a situation of advanced heart disease, for example, you're going to want to be bringing into play all of the other strategies that you have at hand to help to you're going to want to change a person's diet. You're going to want to use you might have to use certain medications to help that person function. But at the same time, if we can get all these other pieces in place, and now we can start to bring in a bioregulator that might start to signal the body to kind of do some repair work. It would be interesting to see. And if you start digging through PubMed, you're going to come up with all kinds of papers, and we may not see Joy for a little while because she'll be in there down the rabbit hole with the rest of us. And you'll be able to see that, there's some really interesting studies, like for example, I think for the lung bioregulator, they did some studies with people with COPD, and the people that were given the lung bioregulator in conjunction with the other treatments actually had a far better outcome than the people who only got the drugs, right? So it's not that we throw away drugs and allopathic medicine completely. Absolutely not. It's just that this now becomes another piece that's not just trying to address the symptom, but as we're addressing the symptom and bringing the body what it needs to restore itself, is there a possibility to signal the body to start doing some repair work from inside?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah, that sounds, fantastic. These organ specific, peptides or bioregulator peptides. I mean, but where do you get them?
Yeah. Where do I go? Where do I shop? I've got my credit card. Where do I go?
Let's go to the bottom line.
Yeah. So explain to me. So let's talk a little bit about where they come from, right? So they were originally isolated from animal tissue.
Okay.
So there's different forms of bioregulators, and there are 3 different versions of bioregulators. The first one, and the one that is the most easily accessed, is actually classified as a nutritional supplement. And these are capsules, and they are extracts from those tissues, glands, and organs.
Which one was it?
So that is when we use the word, endolutin. That's that one of the 3 names of Epidolon. Endolutin is the name of that bioregulator that is encapsulated. And where I get all of my bioregulators is a place called online called Profound Health. So I can give you the website. It's profound-health.com. And we can put this in the show notes. And I actually have a code people can use to get a discount if they want. But they work very closely with Dr. Kevinson. And a lot of the bioregulators, most of the bioregulators on the market are in white boxes, and they've got their Russian names like Glandocort and, Stomacort and all these Russian names, which are really hard to understand and hard to tell what's what kind of thing. So what Profound Health did is, with an agreement with Dr. Kevinson, they've repackaged the bioregulators and rebranded them under a brand called Nature's Marvels. And it says on the box, pineal bioregulator, heart bioregulator, lung bioregulator. So it's the exact same stuff that's in the Russian box, just in nice, easy English.
So when they say heart bioregulators, it's a group of regulators
it's just one. So what's happened is that, in the extract, you probably have some cofactors as well. It's a little bit like, I think the best analogy for this is when you think of glandulars, like glandular supplements. Part of the glandular supplement's strength probably is that there is bioregulator peptide in there.
Maybe
right?
like cerebrolysine.
Exactly. Or desiccated thyroid, for example, right? So you're most likely having some of that thyroid bioregulator in there. Plus you have cofactors and you've got your T3, your T, like, you've got all the other stuff mixed in. And so the nutritional supplement, which is that extract, has that advantage that it has both the amino acid sequence, that's the money piece, plus it's got all the cofactors. The other version of bioregulators that is the second most commonly used and found are what we would call synthetic bioregulators. So this is where they've actually isolated that 2 to 4 amino acid chain and have been able to resynthesize it in a lab. And that form of the bioregulator can be administered either by subcutaneous injection, or increasingly, we're finding sublingual sprays or drops. There's a couple of companies working on transdermal delivery as well. So because they're so tiny, they can cross membranes. They can get in places that nowhere else can, right?
Yeah, I know some people are afraid of glandular extracts or animal extracts.
Yeah.
Do you think that type of fear is founded? It's actually reasonable, or is that just over something?
Well, what are they afraid of?
Let's say cerebrolysine, and I have encountered patients who said, "Oh, I'm what's in it? What pig's brain? Okay, what could the how can we make sure that it's completely
there's no prions and stuff like that?" Yeah. So look, I mean, in the case of cerebrolysine, I think that they go through extensive testing to make sure that whatever they're using is clean. In the case of the bioregulators, again, I think the process is extremely sophisticated. And, last time I heard Kevinson speak, he was like, we've treated millions of people and nobody's ever had an adverse reaction ever. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that the process that they use so this is on the nutritional one, which is the actual extract from the tissue, gland, and organ. When you get to the synthesized bioregulator, there's no issues because it's synthetic. Right. Yeah. The third version, which we don't get here, you wouldn't find it really outside of Russia, as far as I've seen. I mean, I think I know someone who's brought in a little bit on occasion for doctors, but it's very hard to get into the country because now what they've done is they've taken that extract from the tissue, gland, and organ, and they've created an injectable form that is injected intramuscularly. And that would be, I would say that in Russia, that would be what they would use as a first intervention. Let's say if someone has a stroke or they have like a very serious medical condition, because that would be the most fast acting, most powerful form of the bioregulator. The synthetic form is the next up. The synthetics, those are very fast acting, but they tend to be, the effects don't last quite as long. The oral ones, they're not as fast acting, but once they kick in, the effects last a lot longer. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because you've got, on the synthetic side, you're just flipping a switch. On the biological side, you've got this switch flipper, but you also have all the other cofactors that are maybe helping in other ways the system.
Right. So I assume even though you love bioregulators, you still love all the other peptides, right?
You definitely use them differently and for different reasons. From a longevity perspective, I lean towards the bioregulators. But if somebody's going to come to me and say, look, Nat, I strained a muscle, or I've hurt my back, or I've got this problem like a musculoskeletal, or my gut is a mess kind of thing, I'm not going to look to the muscle bioregulator to fix that. I'm going to look towards, something like a BPC 157 and the thymosin beta 4. Like, you're going to move towards those peptides that have more of an immediate kind of signaling effect for the body to prepare.
Okay, that makes sense.
So they kind of have, you're kind of using them in different ways, and they're for different purposes.
Yeah. So I'm curious about, using any of these, either bioregulated peptides or just other peptides. there can still be potential side effects, right?
Yeah. So I would say more so on the other peptides than the bioregulators. The only things I've seen happen on bioregulators on occasion is, and it's kind of interesting is, for example, I've seen women who are postmenopausal, they'll use endolutin, like the Epidolon, and sometimes they'll get a little bit of breakthrough bleeding. Which you could call a side effect, right? But that's the closest thing I've seen to a side effect. Sometimes if people are very sensitive, it may be too much for them at first. Definitely with Epidolon, like people see that their sleep gets better, their sleep cycling improves, their deep sleep improves. On the BPC 157, thymosin beta 4, CJC ipamorelin, that side of the world, I see a lot more side effects. I see, and still not that many by comparison, but I will see people like BPC 157. There's actually now a Facebook group of people who have a really negative reaction to it, in that it drives their anxiety.
Wow. Okay.
Which is weird, right? Because what we're taught is that BPC 157 balances the dopaminergic, serotonergic, and GABAergic centers in the brain. And yet for this little population of people, it does anything but. It makes them nutty.
So I'd like to understand why, because these are naturally occurring peptides. And supposedly when we were little, we had a huge amount of all these peptides, right? And then the amount wanes as we grow older. I assume it's the, the usual degenerative condition, just the human condition, but also maybe the impairment in our gut, that we're not absorbing enough of its essential amino acids to make these various peptides. That's what I'm assuming. What are your thoughts? Why they drastically decline as we age?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know. Well, I mean, so for example, if we look at CJC 1295, which is a growth hormone secretagogue, right? Or ipamorelin. So these are both peptides that stimulate the brain to make more growth hormone. So they're not replacing growth hormone. So we know that we make less growth hormone as we age, either number one, because we're older, and number two, because maybe we're not sleeping as well, or there's more stress. There's, you stop making growth hormone for any number of reasons. Maybe you're not exercising enough, or, there's ways to naturally increase our growth hormone. But the reality is we have lifestyles that overwhelm our bodies. And are right. And so I think that in the case of the CJC ipamorelin, it's not that you stop making CJC and ipamorelin, it's that your growth hormone levels drop. And so these are a way to stimulate the body's production of growth hormone. For BPC 157, I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to your question. All I know is that we have the ability to reintroduce it at therapeutic doses to kind of kickstart those processes again. Right? Yeah. Thymosin beta 4, it's a thymus peptide. Our thymus gland involutes as we age. So maybe we're just not producing as many of those thymus peptides. And so, you're fine if you're healthy, but as soon as you have a challenge, you don't have those reserves anymore. And so by introducing the peptide, we give the body that boost and that signal to do what it once knew how to do on its own.
Yeah. And of course, the side effect profile is very low, but still, there are people with side effects, and it's a little bit puzzling because it's so similar to, it's the same as what your body has been seeing, right?
Yeah. But don't forget that they're synthetics and that they're fragments of proteins, right? Like I don't tolerate thymosin beta 4 or CJC and ipamorelin. I have histamine responses to all of those.
Yeah.
So, and I see that a lot. Like, that Facebook group that I run is now over 14,000 people in there. And it's not that it's the overwhelming majority of people, but it is not uncommon. If people are going to have a histamine response to a peptide, most of the time it's going to be a growth hormone secretagogue or TB4. There's a fragment of TB4 that actually has a negative impact on mast cells. So people with mast cell issues they're like, it triggers them.
What about for peptides like semaglutide? That's also a naturally occurring peptide, correct?
Yeah. So my understanding on semaglutide is what Novo, what's the name of the drug company that just put it out as Ozempic? Novos Pharmaceutical, or anyway, I don't remember the name of it. So it's sold as a drug, as an FDA approved drug called Ozempic. And my understanding is what they did is they took a naturally occurring substance in our gut, but what they did is they extended its half-life. So that, so when it's secreted in the gut, it's there and then it's gone very shortly thereafter. When you take the drug, its half-life is much, much longer in the system. So it's acting on that GLP-1 receptor in a way that just keeps triggering all those mechanisms, not to mention the fact that it's having an effect on the reward centers in the brain, so that you're not quite as driven to eat food, right? Or those snacks that you used to think that you loved. It's really good at helping the body to make an appropriate amount of insulin when you're taking in sugar. It slows down the gastric emptying so that you feel fuller longer. The dark side of that is many people get constipated on it, and many people may get nauseous as well. Then you get an improvement in blood sugar control, right? So, which is an improvement in insulin sensitivity, which is this stuff is pretty magical. Like, what's amazing about it is it has so many health benefits to the brain, to the heart, to the kidneys, to, I think, even to the lungs. And then, of course, just by losing excess body weight, people's inflammation is going to go down. They're going to feel better. They're going to have more energy. I think, this is it's an amazing compound. I think the biggest problem with it is, and again, I've seen this, is when you give someone something like semaglutide and it dramatically reduces their appetite and it helps them to drop weight, if you don't give them the coaching on what to eat so that you make sure that they're getting their protein, they're getting their micronutrients that they need, and that they're not eating a bunch of junk, and that they build new eating habits, and that as soon as they start to feel they've dropped some weight, you get them moving and they start exercising and they start building lean mass. If all of those things don't happen at the same time, you end up with a person who loses a bunch of weight, doesn't exercise, doesn't eat properly, loses their lean mass, doesn't change their eating habits or their lifestyle. They come off the semaglutide, whether it's in 6 months, a year, or 2 years, they go right back to their old habits. And guess what's going to happen?
Yeah.
The weight's going to come back with a vengeance, because now they've lost lean mass on top of everything else. And it's not that semaglutide makes you lose lean mass, but if you're not eating protein and you're not exercising and you're not eating enough to begin with, your body's not going to keep the muscle around. It doesn't need it.
Okay, which came to the other question I have is, what can a person do to maximize the benefit of the peptides? So you kind of answered basically everything that you should do to obtain good health.
Yeah, like you've got to do the work, right? Like the challenge with semaglutide and now tirzepatide, which is, the more recent one that's possibly even better than semaglutide, is that they make it so easy that people are like, oh, this is the closest thing to a silver bullet in weight loss that has ever come out, right? Yeah. Plus it has health benefits. But if people aren't guided and coached to still do the work, it becomes a double-edged sword, and it will turn around and bite you. Like, it's unfortunate, but it will, it's, and then you get newspaper, like, I don't know if you saw it in the media, some celebrity was given Ozempic by her doctor, and then she stopped using it, and then she started binge eating and she regained twice as much weight. And this stuff is so horrible. And I'm like, no, it's not so horrible. It's just that, it's not a get out of jail free card.
Yeah. So for something like semaglutide, how long should a person take it? Like, it regulates your blood sugar metabolism, and does it correct it? Does it have any long-lasting effects after you finish the course? You lost all the weight, you need to lose. And then what?
It's a good question. And I'm not sure anybody really has the answer. So I don't think it particularly fixes anything. I think, and then you have the other issue, which again is also a big question mark, is you have that set point in the brain of where your body weight should be. So what I've seen happen is people kind of start to wean themselves off, right? And then to do that, what they do is they reduce the dose, and then they kind of find that baby dose that allows them to stay where they need to be. And depending on the individual, they might stop it. But again, like at that point, it's just like, it's like you take the training wheels off the bike. Now you got to like kind of watch yourself and just lean into all these great new habits that you formed. And then what'll happen sometimes is people will, after 3, 4, 5, or 6 months, they're like, I've got 5 pounds came back on. So they might do like another 4-week or 6-week cycle and course correct, right? So I think that question is a really good one. And I think it's one that's being addressed by many of the physicians and practitioners who are working with their clients. And it probably just depends on the person. It depends how insulin resistant they were to begin with. Like for some people, it's going to take upwards of a year for them to get to that body weight that they want to be at. So, which is the good thing about that is a year is a long time for you to kind of really create those habits and build that lifestyle that's going to lead to long-term success.
Yeah. Well, I do have patients who swear that they are doing everything they can. They cannot eat any healthier. I'm sure anything can be improved upon. But if they do have this insulin or sugar metabolism, abnormalities that semaglutide can help correct, I'm just wondering, if the correction, how long lasting it is. But I don't know if anyone has done any research to see if it actually corrected it, like for the long run.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that research yet. It might be around, but I haven't seen it. I think that, and I interviewed someone we did a podcast just on tirzepatide. You may have listened to it. And he said, look, he's also a medical practitioner. He goes, I get people coming into my office. They're eating well, they're exercising, they're sleeping, they're doing all the things. And the body will just not release the extra weight. And you bring something like this on board, and it's a gift, right? Because you have a person in front of you who's doing everything they possibly can, and they just can't move the needle. It's kind of heartbreaking.
I know. And it's amazing. I've got people who are just thrilled with no effort, within, a couple months, 30 pounds, 16 pounds. Just pretty much effortlessly. And it's just, there's been nothing like it.
And I think there'll be more, I think there will be others that come down the pipes. Like they've kind of, it's like a miner has hit in a mine, they've hit a vein of gold, and they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And look at this one and look at that. And I think that, that whole sector is going to kind of expand and grow. And I think it's really encouraging. It's just, people have to be smart. They just have to be wise. And the other caution, I think, with semaglutide and tirzepatide is because it can be a challenge to the pancreas. And we've seen, some people can develop pancreatitis from these peptides. That is one of the very few side effects. I really recommend my clients don't drink or minimally consume alcohol. Like, you don't want to do anything that's going to challenge your put more pressure on the pancreas. And sometimes, I think it might be a good idea to do to take some BPC 157 at the same time, because it protects the organs, right? That's body protective compound. Or maybe use a peptide bioregulator and help give that signal to the pancreas now that it's kind of, working more efficiently. And maybe there's been damage over the years to help it to regenerate a little bit as you're doing the work. So, it's pulling from different places and saying, what else can we do to help the body, to your point, that maybe has been stuck in some unhealthy patterns for a while, maybe give some help to the liver and the pancreas, like that whole digestive system, work on the microbiome.
Right.
That's another one. There's no peptide that's going to fix your microbiome.
That's right. Those are just, whole new critters that we have to, you either have them or you not have them. They're either healthy or not healthy in your body. So you have to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I want to ask you, what are your favorite bioregulators and favorite, other peptides?
So my favorite I should say that I've taken them all because I'm in a clinical trial and, I'm working on reducing that biological age. So I cycle through all the bioregulators month to month to month. But and people have asked me, and so I would say my desert island bioregulator, if I only can have one, it would be the Epidolon.
Okay.
If I could have two, I would probably pick Epidolon with the thymus bioregulator, because then it would be the pineal gland and the thymus gland. So immunity and pineal. And then if I only had three, then I would probably add the blood vessel bioregulator. But that's me, right? I think Epidolon should be, and Epidolon is the central pillar of almost every protocol, as well as the blood vessel bioregulator. And the reason for that is blood vessel. If you think about it, if you don't have good circulation, you're not going to get nutrients to the cell. You're not going to get waste products out of the cell. It kind of makes sense that it would be an anchor. But after that, it kind of depends. Like if a person has liver issues or heart issues, or, there's another one called Cartilax, which is a cartilage bioregulator. But what it does is it upregulates the production of collagen and elastin. Well, I'm at a point where my bones, are going to be under pressure. So I'm going to use Cartilax to help, because healthy bones are flexible, right? And also I'd like my skin to have access to collagen and elastin. Thank you very much. So it's, it's a little bit like being asked, what's your favorite child? You're kind of like, well, I kind of can't pick a favorite, but push comes to shove, Epidolon, thymus, and blood vessel would be the three. And then on the peptide side, I'm a bit limited because I can't use TB4 or CJC ipamorelin. I think if I could, they would be at the top of the list. But BPC 157 for me, because it's so versatile and it does so many things. If I could only have one peptide, it would be that one. And then I think the next one, I don't know, maybe it could be thymus and alpha-1, or it could be GHK. It's kind of hard to decide between the two of those.
Yeah, GHK is almost a bioregulator.
It's borderline, right? It's only 3 amino acids. It acts on the DNA. It does like all these different things. Like, it even has brain benefits. It's right. If you have an injury, it helps to reduce scarring. It's like good for skin. It's a little bit nutty, all the things that little tiny peptide can do.
Yeah. And I want to ask you, how long should you take, let's say Epidolon. I know it's studied, the treatment course is 15 days, twice a year, right? That's the common regimen. How would you dose this peptide?
The way to use bioregulators varies from person to person based on their goals. Right. So let's say you have a 30 or 35-year-old person that comes to you and says, look, I want to get started on my longevity plan. And so in that case, you might say, yeah, you know what, let's look at Epidolon. We'll do 2 cycles a year. If you're using the oral, you might do 30 days of the oral bioregulator once or twice a year. You have a 50-year-old that comes in, and you might do their telomere testing and find out that their telomeres are really quite short for someone their age. Well, what you might do then is you might start with a 30-day course of that Epidolon, and then you might pulse it 10 days a month for another 3 to 6 months after that. And typically the bioregulators are used in stacks or in groups. They're rarely used on their own. So you'll always see like groups of bioregulators, and they kind of make sense, right? If you have someone who, they've got cortisol issues or whatever the case may be, and you're like, oh, those adrenal glands, they probably could use some help. You're gonna support the adrenals, but you're probably also going to support the thyroid gland, because the thyroid's probably dragging its butt at the same time. And so, to me, what I like to do is I like to help people to think about what are all the systems. And this is where physicians really shine, because because physicians understand, oh, you've got a bone density issue. Well, we're going to look at parathyroid, because there's a parathyroid bioregulator. We're going to look at the kidneys too, because kidneys have some if the kidneys are compromised and the mineral balance in the body is off, and then there's the cartilage. So you kind of sit there and you start to think about what are all the different, and this is the invitation, is to think about the body as a whole, right? And not to just say, oh, the heart needs help, we're going to do the heart bioregulator. We're going to think about the whole system and where we can bring assistance to it. So, I mean, you asked about the cycles. So it really depends. Number one, if you're doing this preventatively, like the person has no issues, and you're just saying, we're getting started early on our longevity plan, so we might do 1 or 2 cycles a year. Or if we have a person in front of us who really has some imbalances, and so now we're going to say, okay, we might start with a 30 or 20 day, let's say, loading period, and then we might do 10 days a month for a period of time, while we're also supporting that issue in all the other ways that we know how.
Okay. So I think I heard you interviewed John Francois.
Yeah.
Blake, right? You interviewed him a lot. I think he was the one that was saying that, yeah, you only need to do it once every 6 months because it changes the DNA, and once the DNA is fixed, then you don't need to do anything with the cells anymore.
It doesn't change the DNA. I'm not going to agree with that statement. Look at me disagreeing with Jean-Francois. I don't think it changes the DNA. What it does is it gives the DNA the signal to do something for a period of time. And so if it's upregulating those proteins and those proteins are being put to use, when you stop using the bioregulator, you have the benefit of whatever improvements have been made, but that signal is now gone. So if you want more work, and Professor Cavinson speaks to a 42% biological reserve in every organism. And so it's almost like this untapped potential that we all have. And so what the bioregulator does is it taps into that potential for the repair work. Because don't forget that the bioregulator is only looking to, like, you're not going to become a superhuman by using bioregulators. You're just going to become the best version of yourself that you can be. It's a bit of it's a nuance, right? It's not, if you keep taking the heart bioregulator, you're not going to have a super duper heart. It's just going to restore your heart to, hopefully over time, within reason, it's going to restore function to the heart. Okay.
Well, that helps. That helps. So people who are a little sicker, who needs more repair work, something like the Epidolon, then we can actually dose them more frequently.
Exactly. Like you can dose them more frequently. You might, and the other big thing that happened with the bioregulators is, for years, people were walking around saying you need 10 milligrams a day for 100 days or 10 days of the injectable Epidolon, which actually was a confusion that happened. The 10 milligrams a day injections that they were doing in Russia were of the one we talked about earlier. It was that biological extract that we actually don't get here. It's that intramuscular one. When it comes to the 4 amino acid chain of Epidolon, and it's the synthetic one, we're talking for just maintenance. For maintenance dose, you're looking at maybe 100 micrograms a day. You could use more. There's never been a problem with people using more. And so sometimes you have someone who's an insomniac, or they have major sleep issues, whatever the case may be. You might use 1 or 2 milligrams a day for 20 days, but you only need 100 micrograms.
Yeah. Have they done any studies on reversing biological age from any of these bioregulators?
So there's a big clinical trial going on right now. It's with one of my podcast guests, actually. I don't know if you got back that far. This is, if you go back to episodes 42 and 46 of the podcast, I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Bill Lawrence. And so he's running, that's the clinical trial I'm in. He's running.
He's very interesting to listen to. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, he's fantastic. And so he's been running this clinical trial now, I think, for probably 4 years. And they've literally shown that they've lengthened telomeres, and people's biological age, like their DNA methylation status, has dramatically improved. Now, the DNA methylation takes longer to shift than the telomeres.
Is it Epidolon that he was using?
He's using all of them.
Oh, all of them. Okay.
He's using them all. So, when I got my program from Bill, it was 7 to 9 different bioregulators every single month for 10 days a month. So I would do 3, 3, and 3, or 3, 3, and 2, whatever the case may be.
And this is all by mouth.
Yeah. So he's using the oral bioregulators in his study.
Yeah. Wonderful. Maybe I should be part of the study.
Well, if you want to join the study, let me know. I can maybe introduce you.
Okay. That'll be amazing. Yeah. So, and when it comes to these peptides, do you think by ingesting or injecting some of these peptides, that's going to in any way reduce your body's own production of them? Is there any chance of that?
I don't think so. I don't really, it's not like I don't have a study here to show you or a lab report to say, no, we can say, the beauty of these things, it's not like there's a negative feedback loop, right? I think where we see that kind of thing happening is like, for example, with exogenous growth hormone or testosterone. These are hormones that the body has a negative feedback loop built in that says when your testosterone is high enough, there's a signal to the brain, and the brain's like, okay, shut it, tells the testes, we're good, we got enough. Or growth hormone is the same thing. And so when we bring in growth hormone or testosterone from the outside, we can depress our own production. With apidolon and or even BPC 157, I think at this point it's a situation where your body has what it has, and you're just introducing a compound for a purpose to move the needle a little further. But I've never read or seen anything that would imply that we make less because we're taking it from the outside.
Yeah, that's great. So I was thinking, my thoughts when I, finally kind of grasped the vast and the cutting edge world of peptides. My thought was that if there's no objections from the powers to be, and there's no fighting back about, utilizing these peptides, I think the peptides could end up replacing probably over 70% of the medications that we're using these days.
It'll reduce the use, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think what'll happen, it's not that there'll always be a place for some medications in some cases, like we talked about earlier. But what if you could help people not to get sick in the first place?
Right.
Right. What if you could help an injury to heal so that there's not the degeneration in the joint that follows from a long-term injury? Like, I think those are the really enticing. And what if you could avoid someone becoming a full-blown diabetic by helping them to lose weight by using something like semaglutide? Like, I think that and for like from a regulatory and a political perspective, it gets really complicated and very muddy as to why people are making the rules that they're making sometimes. But we have to hope that the desire for humanity to be healthier and just better off is going to prevail. And we're going to see regulatory bodies allow the use of these things, because unfortunately, the last couple of years haven't been good for peptides. We've seen things pulled off the market that for no good reason other than maybe that they work too well.
Which ones are you talking about?
So thymosin alpha-1, you'd be hard pressed to find a compounding pharmacy that could make it. Thymosin beta-4 is another one. I think the compounding pharmacies can't make anymore, and they've classified it as a biologic. And I think that's really unfortunate, because I can tell you that in the community that I run, we have people who are down to their last options. Conventional medicine wasn't able to help them. And it's only by them becoming their own health sleuths that they, like, you get these people who get really sick and they're not getting any answers. They're not getting any help. And they start digging into the literature. They find these solutions, they apply to themselves, and they sometimes get really incredible results.
Yeah. And so, actually, before we wrap up, we actually want to ask you, from your own experience of talking to so many people and then, doing consultations with so many people, what kind of interesting results have you seen from either bioregulator peptides or just other peptides?
So, you know, I mean, on the bioregulator front, like I said to you before, like we talked about the postmenopausal woman who had breakthrough bleeding, but the flip side of that, I've seen cycling women who had lost their cycle for whatever reason, who brought on Epidolon and the ovarian bioregulator and restored their cycle, right? So, or it can help with fertility. Not because it makes you more fertile, but if it starts to help your body to rebalance its hormones, then all of a sudden, and they're still doing all the other work, let's not forget, you know, they're doing all the other things, they're managing their stress, they may be also using adrenals. With thymosin alpha-1, like, I mean, we've seen people with crazy autoimmune issues just help to stabilize their immune systems, right? Yeah. And just be able to live a normal life. There's one woman in our community, I mean, unfortunately, she's re-injured herself right now, but she had a spinal leak because of a medical error. And so, you know, so she was essentially horizontal for 2 years. Like she literally couldn't sit up. And it was by using, I think it was GHK and thymosin beta-4 that helped. And the thing is, so here's the thing, right? So there was a medical error made. They used too big a gauge of a needle when they were taking some cerebrospinal fluid to test her for something. What they didn't know is that she had a condition called EDS, which is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So her body doesn't make collagen properly. And so that puncture, which shouldn't have been that big in the first place, couldn't heal. And when they tried to patch it, it didn't stick. Like it was one thing after the other, right? And she was able to restore her mobility and reclaim her life by using GHK and thymosin beta-4, and I think a couple of other peptides. Unfortunately, I just heard from her 2 weeks ago. She slipped and fell on the ice. It reopened her leak. And so now she's kind of back to square one again. But this is a person who, unfortunately, like the conventional medical world had nothing for her. She actually sits on a board with a bunch of researchers and doctors who specialize in this condition. And I'm like, well, they must be fascinated to hear your story. And they're like, no, they blow me off. They don't want to hear what I have to say. And I'm like, what do you mean? That doesn't make any sense.
Oh, yeah. So, that's a common story, which I don't understand. You know, the intellectual curiosity and also the drive to heal. I mean, that should be those two combined. I mean, that's what every doctor should have, right? The drive to heal and some intellectual curiosity.
Well, the curiosity is a big one. That's the thing. I think that somehow maybe it just gets crushed out of doctors in med school or somewhere along, or they, you know, I mean, I think there's some people who are naturally curious and others who aren't. And I think the doctors that are doing the most amazing work in this space are people like you who are just curious and like, well, what do you mean? There's this, what are you talking about? And, you know, and then like, tell me more. It doesn't mean you're going to buy into everything, but it's going to lead you down that road of doing your work and your homework and investigating and saying, is there a way for me to apply this with my patients? And as long as it's safe, I'm all in kind of thing.
Yeah. I love that story. That's amazing. The spinal membrane basically being patched up.
Well, it's giving the body it's helping the body to do something. Now we'll see if she's able to fix it. I mean, I've got my fingers and toes crossed for her. I really hope that she's able to get back on her feet again. But anyway, so those are a couple of the standout, you know, but we've seen, you know, certainly people with severe gut issues like Crohn's and colitis, again, using the peptides as part of their program. Like they've got to change their diet. They've got to address the microbiome. Like they have to do so many things. But though, like just BPC 157 with KPV and lorazepam, like I can put those guys right into remission if they get the right guidance and they're doing the work.
Beautiful. Yeah. So what is that, the discount code that you were going to share with people?
Oh, which one? Oh, for Profound Health?
For the bioregulator peptides. Yeah.
Yeah. So Profound Health, that's it's longevity 15 is on. It'll be good on your first order, and then after that, they'll send you some little coupons and things that you can use. So they'll take care of you after your first time.
Yeah, amazing. Profoundhealth.com.
Yeah. So it's profound-health.com is the website. Yeah, I mean, that's my favorite place to get my bioregulators because they're very professional. They're in the UK, but they also have they have a straight line to the man himself. So if, there's ever any questions or anything, they're pretty well equipped to answer.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I'm sure this has been a fascinating listen to, for a lot of people, and I certainly enjoyed it. And where can people find you and follow you?
Okay, thank you, Joy. So you can find me on the podcast, Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast. There is the Facebook group, the Optimizing Superhuman Performance group. Although it's getting really crazy in there these days. I've started a new community on Mighty Networks called BSP Community. And the best place for people to learn about that is on my website, which is natniddam.com. And it's not free like Facebook, but it's smaller, it's more intimate. And we're doing really great stuff in there. We're bringing in experts to do live Q&As with people. We're doing N of 1 experiments. Right now, we're doing something with Day and Goodenow from Prodrome Sciences. People are doing a brain and metabolic reset for 30 days. So we get to do a lot more hands-on fun things. I do live Q&As in there once a month, like a couple of times a month. So I think it's a better community. It costs people a couple of dollars to be a member, but it's not quite as kooky as the Facebook group, which is fantastic, but it's really busy.
Sounds like you've lost control.
I haven't quite lost control, but it's 14,000 people is a lot of people.
It took on a life of its own.
Yeah, exactly. I'm very grateful for it though, because we learn a lot together, and it's a very vibrant community. I will say this, like very, very happening. It's just, you got to, I'm in there every single day, but other people find they have to go in small doses sometimes.
Yeah, this is amazing. Thank you so much. I've started using peptides in conjunction with stem cell therapy. Amazing. Because I realize that there's so many people with so many targeted problems. And if I can give them extra dose of something just for that problem, I'm going to enhance their healing, much more effectively. So I love having extra tools. And that's another rabbit hole, peptides, bioregulators. So it's super fun. Yeah.
So I can't wait to have you on the podcast and talk about stem cells. So I think that'll be our next conversation.
Yeah, I can't wait. Okay. All right, Nathalie, it's been really great. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And I hope people find this really helpful.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.